She dropped the napkin at Nia's feet like it was garbage, because in her mind, that's exactly what Nia was. The entire marble lobby of the Aurelius Hotel went quiet. 50 people in designer gowns and tailored suits, and not one of them made a sound. They just watched, waited. Some of them even smiled, that small, satisfied smile people wear when they think they're about to see someone put in their place. Vanessa Crowe stood there, chin lifted, champagne flute in hand, and said 2 words that cut through the silence like a blade. Pick it up. And Nia Holloway, a woman who had clawed her way to the top of one of the most brutal industries in New York, looked down at that white dinner napkin on the floor. Then she looked up, and the room held its breath. If you were standing in that lobby, what would you have done? Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because every single week we bring you stories like this one. Stories about dignity, about power, about what happens when the wrong person underestimates the right woman. Drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if this kind of storytelling speaks to you, please leave a like. It genuinely helps more than you know. Now, let's go back to where this really begins. Nia Holloway had a rule she'd kept for 11 years of building her career from nothing. Never walk into a room looking like you need it to accept you. It wasn't arrogance, it was survival. She'd learned earlier than most people should have to learn anything, that certain rooms in this city were designed to make you feel like a guest in your own life. The trick wasn't to fight the room. The trick was to walk in like you built it. So on the night of the Aurelius Hotel's annual Legacy Gala, Nia did exactly that. She wore an emerald gown she'd found at a consignment shop in Harlem and spent 3 weeks having tailored by a seamstress named Mrs. Patterson, who worked out of her kitchen on 143rd Street. The dress cost her less than most women in that room, spent on a single earring. But it fit Nia like it had been designed specifically for her body, her full hips, her broad shoulders. The way she carried herself, like she was always about to say something worth hearing. She walked into the Aurelius at 7:42 p.m. By 7:44, she'd already been stopped twice by men who wanted to know who she was with. Not who she was with. "I'm with myself," she told the second one. "I find the company excellent." She moved deeper into the lobby, scanning the room the way she always did in new environments, cataloging exits, identifying power centers, noting who spoke to whom and who refused to make eye contact with her. It was a habit she'd developed back when she was 22, fresh out of a state university on a partial scholarship, walking into boardrooms where she was routinely the only black woman and the only person in the room who didn't have a family name that opened doors. She had learned to read rooms the way other people read newspapers, fast, thoroughly, and with an instinct for what the headline wasn't saying out loud. Tonight's headline was simple. Old money was nervous about new money. The guest list had shifted this year. More independent players. More people who'd built their success outside the traditional networks. And the old guard, the families whose wealth was measured in generations, not decades they were circling. Smiling at the right people, cutting the wrong ones with well-placed silences. Nia had been navigating that particular battlefield her entire professional life. She was good at it. She was very, very good at it. What she didn't see coming, what nobody ever sees coming, because it's always the thing you're not watching for, was Vanessa Crowe. Vanessa Crowe was 51 years old and had spent the last 2 decades building herself into something that looked, from a careful distance, like a powerful woman. She ran the Crowe Foundation for Women's Leadership, which hosted international summits and published glossy annual reports and had its name on a building at a university in Connecticut that Zessa had graduated from on her 3rd attempt. She appeared on panels. She gave keynotes about resilience and dignity and the importance of lifting other women up. She was also, in the private language of the people who actually knew her, absolutely vicious. Not in ways that were easy to prove. Vanessa was too smart for that. She worked through suggestion and implication. A comment here, a well-timed silence there. She had an extraordinary gift for making people feel small without ever saying anything specific enough to confront. It was a kind of social surgery. She could open a wound in your confidence with a single well-placed look, and by the time you felt the bleeding, she was already across the room talking to someone else. She had been doing this for so long that it had become involuntary. She didn't even have to think about it anymore. Her cruelty had the smooth, automatic quality of muscle memory. Nia had met women like Vanessa before. She'd met dozens of them, but she'd never met one with quite so specific a reason to hate her. That reason had a name. His name was Roman, but that comes later. The napkin moment didn't come out of nowhere. That's the thing people always miss when they hear this story. They hear the ending, and they assume it was spontaneous. Some rich woman having a bad night. Some impulsive act of cruelty. It wasn't impulsive. It was orchestrated. Vanessa had positioned herself near the lobby's central bar for 40 minutes before Nia arrived. She'd tracked Nia's confirmed attendance on the guest list 3 days earlier. She had friends on the organizing committee, because Vanessa always had friends on organizing committees. She'd chosen her location carefully. Good sight lines, good acoustics, enough people nearby to serve as an audience, but not so crowded that the moment would get lost. She waited, and when Nia walked past her, champagne glass in hand, moving toward a cluster of financial professionals she'd arranged to meet that evening, Vanessa simply dropped her dinner napkin right at Nia's feet, and then she said it. Pick it up. 2 words, said with the absolute certainty of a woman who had never once, in 51 years of living, been told no by someone she decided was beneath her. Nia stopped walking. The lobby quieted in that particular way, that rooms go quiet when something is happening that everyone can feel, but nobody quite wants to name yet. Champagne glasses paused halfway to mouths. Side conversations trailed off. 50 people suddenly found reasons to look in the same direction without peering to look. Nia looked down at the napkin. It was a white dinner napkin, folded once. Probably cost the hotel $12 wholesale, part of a set of 200 laundered daily, and pressed flat by a woman in the basement whose name none of the guests upstairs would ever know. Nia looked at it for what felt like a long time. In reality, it was maybe 3 seconds. Then she bent down. Vanessa smiled, and it was that smile, that specific, satisfied, I knew it some smile, that was the final miscalculation of her evening. Because Vanessa had already decided what was happening. She'd already written the ending in her head. The plus-size black woman was going to pick up the napkin. The lobby was going to watch. And Vanessa was going to walk away having established something that required no words. A hierarchy. A reminder of how certain people saw the world, and where they believed certain other people belonged in it. She had mistaken Nia Holloway for someone who needed her approval. Nia picked up the napkin. Then she reached over calmly and dipped one corner of it into Vanessa's champagne glass. She held it there for exactly 1 second. Then she pressed the soaked cloth cold, fizzing, dripping directly against the front of Vanessa's silk dress. The sound it made was small, a soft, wet sound, barely audible. The effect was enormous. Now you can pick it up. Nia's voice was quiet, not trembling, not angry, just quiet with an edge underneath it that could have cut glass. She released the napkin. It fell against Vanessa's dress and then dropped to the floor between them. For a full 3 seconds, nobody in the lobby moved or spoke. Then the gasps came. Not loud, polished. People don't gasp loudly in hotel lobbies, but they came. That ripple of collective, involuntary sound that means something just happened that cannot be taken back. Vanessa's face went through several expressions very rapidly. Shock first, then a flush of genuine humiliation, her cheeks going red in a way that her carefully applied foundation couldn't hide. Then rage. The kind of rage that comes from someone who has never, in their adult life, been answered back. Not like this. Not in front of an audience. Not by someone they had decided in advance didn't count. Her hand shot out and grabbed Nia's wrist. Her grip was tight, tighter than it needed to be. And in that grip was everything that Vanessa Crowe was. Stripped of the keynote speeches and the glossy annual reports and the building with her name on it, a woman who, when challenged, reached for control. Physical, immediate, undeniable control. Nia didn't pull away. She went very still, and then the crowd began to move. Not because anything visible had changed, but because certain people in rooms like this one have a sensitivity developed over years of navigating spaces where power operates below the surface, a sensitivity to shifts in atmosphere, to the change in air pressure that happens when someone important enters a space, when someone whose presence rearranges the furniture of a room even before anyone can say exactly why. The crowd moved, and Roman Bellandi walked through the lobby. He was 35 years old, and he moved through the Aurelius like he owned it. Not with the aggressive, performative confidence of someone who needed people to know they were important. Something quieter than that. Something more settled. The kind of ease that comes when you've spent enough years being genuinely dangerous that you no longer need to prove it to anyone. He wore a black suit, no tie. The collar of his white shirt was open at the throat. Tattoos ran up both sides of his neck and across both hands, not the small. Decorative tattoos of someone who made careful choices, but dense, old ink that had accumulated over years. Each piece connected to the next in a way that told a story if you knew how to read it. Most people in this room didn't know how to read it. Most people in this room, seeing Roman Bellandi, felt a vague and sourceless discomfort that they would later describe as something off about him without being able to articulate what. The people who did know how to read those tattoos felt something more specific. They moved out of his way. Roman stopped beside Nia. He didn't look at Nia first. He looked at Vanessa's hand, the one wrapped around Nia's wrist. His eyes stayed there for a moment. Then he looked at Vanessa. Let her go. His voice was the same kind of quiet Nia's had been, but with a different quality underneath it. Not an edge. Something heavier than an edge. Something that didn't need to explain itself. Vanessa released Nia's wrist immediately. It wasn't a decision. It was a reflex. The kind of thing the body does before the mind has time to argue. Roman looked down at Nia's wrist. There were marks there where Vanessa's fingers had been. He looked at them for a moment without speaking. Then he looked back at Vanessa. You put your hands on someone under my protection. Vanessa straightened. She was trying to recover herself. Trying to locate the version of this situation where she still had control of it. She humiliated me, she said. Her voice came out thinner than she intended. In front of everyone. Roman looked at her. No. He said it without inflection. Just a statement of fact. The way you'd describe the weather. You humiliated yourself. He said nothing else. He didn't need to. Vanessa Crowe, who had built a career on the art of making people feel small, stood in the marble lobby of the Aurelius Hotel in a champagne-soaked dress and felt, for perhaps the first time in her adult life, precise sensation she had spent decades inflicting on others. Turned and walked away. The crowd rearranged itself. Conversations resumed. Glasses were raised again. The lobby returned to the smooth, managed theater of a luxury event, as if the last 4 minutes had never happened. But everyone there would remember them. And Vanessa Crowe would remember them most of all. What nobody in that lobby understood what they spent the next several days speculating about in private messages and lunch conversations and hushed exchanges at other events was why. Why Roman Bellandi, whose name controlled a significant portion of New York's underworld, whose family connections stretched back 3 generations, who had the city's politicians and police commissioners quietly returning his calls, why that man had walked into a hotel lobby and spoken 2 words in defense of a woman that most of them had never seen before. Under my protection, those 3 words did more damage to Vanessa's evening than the champagne-soaked napkin had, because they implied a relationship, a history, a loyalty that ran in both directions. What they didn't imply, what nobody in that lobby could have guessed, was the actual story behind them. The actual story didn't happen in a hotel lobby. It happened on a Tuesday night in March, 2 months earlier, in a different part of this city, in a different kind of room. And it started not with Nia receiving something from Roman. It started with her saving his life. She hadn't known who he was. That was the part Roman kept coming back to in the weeks afterward, not the fact that she'd helped him. People helped strangers sometimes. That happened. What stopped him, what he genuinely could not get past, was the context in which she'd done it. Private fundraising dinner. A converted warehouse space in Tribeca, the kind of event where the guest list was more carefully curated than most federal witness protection programs. 90 people, give or take. Old money, new money, and the kind of money that prefers not to be categorized. 4-course meal, serious wine. A string quartet playing in the corner. The attack had come fast. In these situations, they always did. One moment the room was a room, the next it wasn't. Roman had been hit during the first 30 seconds when he didn't know, in the moment, how, seriously. Pain has a way of compressing time and distorting information when it's acute enough. He knew he was on the floor. He knew the marble was cold. He knew that the people around him were moving away from him, rather than toward him. That last part didn't surprise him. In Roman Bellandi's world, people moved away from trouble. It was instinct. It was survival. He had spent his entire adult life in a world where that was not only understood but expected. What surprised him was the woman who moved toward it. She appeared in his peripheral vision, first a flash of dark fabric, and then she was beside him, kneeling on the marble, and she was doing something that it took him a moment to process. She was talking to him, not panicking, not screaming, not demanding to know what was happening or why, just talking. Clear, specific, direct. Stay with me. Keep your eyes open. Tell me your name. He told her his first name. Just Roman. His voice came out rougher than he expected. Roman. Okay, I've got you. Keep looking at me. She put pressure on the wound without hesitating. Found something in her clutch. He found out later it was a silk scarf, something she'd bought at a street market in Paris the previous spring, and used it without a second thought about what it cost or what it meant to ruin it. For 11 minutes she stayed. She talked him through it. Not with false comfort or empty reassurance. She didn't say, "You're going to be fine," or "It's not that bad," or any of the things people say when they're trying to manage their own fear. She said useful things, grounding things. She told him her name. She told him what she could see. She told him the paramedics were 3 minutes out, then 2, then 1. When they arrived, she stood up, stepped back, and got out of their way. And when Roman looked for her again, after the paramedics had stabilized him enough for him to register his surroundings, she was gone. He didn't get her last name. He didn't get her number. He didn't get anything except the memory of a woman in dark fabric, kneeling on cold marble, talking him back from the edge of something very bad, and then disappearing into the night without staying to explain herself or collect whatever reward or connection such an act might have earned her. Roman Bellandi had spent his entire life in a world where everything cost something, where every kindness was an investment, every gesture an expectation, every act of loyalty a debt to be called in later. This woman had done something for him and then simply left. He didn't know what to do with that. So he did the only thing that made sense to him. He found her. It took his people 4 days to identify her. Nia Holloway, 32 years old, independent financial strategist. Own firm, 12 employees, clients that ranged from small family businesses to mid-sized companies, navigating complicated growth transitions. No Ivy League pedigree, no family money, no powerful mentor whose influence she'd absorbed through proximity. Everything she had, she'd built herself. He sent flowers first. A large arrangement, expensive, sent to her office on a Wednesday morning. Something that would make a statement. His assistant called to report the results later that afternoon. She thanked the delivery person and distributed the arrangement to the staff. Her own desk has a single succulent on it. She said, and I'm quoting, "I don't keep things that are going to die on me." Roman had smiled at that. He sent a car next. A standing offer a driver, available to her whenever she needed one, for as long as she wanted it. She used it once to transport some files across town when her usual courier called in sick. Then she thanked the driver, tipped him generously, and sent back a politely worded note, explaining that she preferred to drive herself. The note was handwritten, good handwriting, direct sentences. He read it 3 times. Then he sent 2 dinner invitations, on separate occasions, to restaurants he owned interests, in places where the chef's name appeared in food magazines, and the reservation waiting list ran 6 months deep. The kind of places designed to impress. Both were declined, politely, with specific scheduling conflicts listed. He suspected the scheduling conflicts were real. He sent a 3rd invitation, different in tone from the first 2, not to one of his restaurants, to a small Italian place in the West Village that had been making the same 4 pastas since 1987, and where the lighting was bad and the tables were too close together. And the owner, a 70-year-old man named Marco, would come out of the kitchen halfway through your meal to argue with you about whether you'd ordered correctly. The 3rd invitation was accepted. He didn't know, until later, that she'd accepted it specifically because of where it was. "I've been to the kind of restaurant you tried to take me to first," she told him, that first evening, tearing off a piece of bread without looking at him. "They're designed to make you feel like you owe something for being there. I don't eat in rooms that are trying to sell me something. Roman looked at her across the small table. This place is trying to sell you overpriced spaghetti. That's honest, at least. He laughed. He didn't laugh easily or often, and it surprised him, the sound of it in that particular room. She noticed. She didn't comment on it. Instead, she said, "You've been very persistent. You're a difficult person to get in front of." "I'm not difficult." She broke the bread in half and set one piece down. "I just don't move for people who expect me to." Roman considered that. "What made you stay?" he asked. That night, she looked at him. It was a direct look, the kind that didn't slide away from what it was looking at. "You were hurt. Other people left." "I know." She picked up her wine glass. "That's their business. Most people would have wanted something for it afterward. Recognition. Connection. Something. I got you to the paramedics. That was the job. The job was done." She shrugged, not unkindly. "I don't collect debts on things I did because they were the right thing to do." Roman was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's a very particular way to live." "It's the only way I know how." She looked at him steadily. "What about you?" he answered honestly, which was not something he did with most people. "I've never done anything I didn't expect something for." She nodded, as if this confirmed a theory she'd been forming. "Then this dinner must be confusing for you." "Extremely," he said. She smiled. It was the first time he'd seen her smile. And it was the kind of smile that didn't perform itself. It just happened. Briefly, genuinely, and then was gone. Kind of smile that meant something specifically because it wasn't automatic. He thought about that smile for 3 days afterward. There were 6 dinners over the following 2 months. Each one slightly longer than the last Ostet, each one pulling the conversation somewhere more specific, more personal, more unguarded than the one before. She told him about growing up in a house where the heat got shut off 3 times before she turned 15, and about deciding, at 16, that she would understand money better than anyone who had ever made her feel small about not having it. She told him about the finance professor at her state university who'd told her she had the aptitude but not the connections, and about how she'd taken that sentence apart and rebuilt it into a business plan. She told him about the clients who'd tested her in ways they'd never have tested a white male advisor her age. About walking into rooms where people waited for her to slip up so they could feel justified in the assumptions they'd already made. About developing a kind of patience so refined that it had become, over time, something close to strategy. Roman listened in ways he wasn't used to listening, without waiting for his own turn to speak, without calculating what her words meant for him. He told her things too. Not everything. He would never tell anyone everything, and she didn't ask him to, but more than he was accustomed to telling. About what it meant to inherit a name that was both a shield and a sentence. About the difference between the power people imagined him having and the complicated, constrained reality of it. She didn't romanticize it. She didn't shrink from it either. "You didn't choose to be born into this," she said one evening. "No, but you choose what you do with it, every day." She looked at him. "That's a harder sentence than it sounds." "Yes," he said. "It is." She nodded. And she didn't push further, didn't moralize, didn't extract promises or deliver judgments. She simply acknowledged it, the weight of it, the complexity of it, and let it sit between them without trying to resolve it into something cleaner than it was. That, Roman thought, was rarer than almost anything he had encountered in 35 years. It was on the evening of the 6th dinner that he took her to his parents' house, a row house in Carroll Gardens where his mother had hung the same curtains for 30 years, and his father still read the newspaper, in print, and the kitchen always smelled like something that had been cooking since morning. His mother welcomed Nia like she'd been expected. His father took longer. He sat across the dinner table from her, for most of the first hour, watching her the way he watched most things, slowly, carefully, with the patience of a man who had lived long enough to understand that first impressions were designed to deceive you. Toward the end of the meal, he set down his fork and asked, without preamble, "Do powerful men scare you?" Nia didn't miss a beat. "No, but stupid decisions do." There was a silence. Then Roman's father laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere deep and honest, and reached over and refilled her wine glass without being asked. Later that night, walking back to the car, Roman looked at her. "My father doesn't laugh at dinner. Maybe he doesn't often hear funny things at dinner. He liked you." She glanced sideways at him. "I noticed." "That's rare," Roman said. "I figured." She paused. He was testing me. Yes, I know. She was quiet for a moment. I've been tested my whole life. I'm good at tests. Roman stopped walking. She stopped too and looked at him. The difference, he said carefully, is that you shouldn't have had to be. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "No, but I am anyway." And she kept walking. And Roman stood there, on the sidewalk in Carroll Gardens for a few seconds, watching her, thinking about the distance between the life she'd been given and the life she'd made for herself, and about how few people he'd ever met who'd covered that distance without letting it make them hard or small or bitter. Then he caught up with her, and neither of them said anything else for the rest of the walk. But something had shifted, something that Vanessa Crowe, watching from a distance she'd been carefully maintaining for weeks, had already noticed, and was already beginning to plan against. Vanessa Crowe didn't go home after the Aurelius Hotel. She had a driver waiting outside a black car, the same one she used for every event, booked through the same service she'd used for 9 years. But she didn't get into it immediately. She stood on the sidewalk outside the hotel's main entrance for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. She knew exactly how long because she was staring at her watch. It was a habit she'd developed years ago, in moments when she needed to feel like she was controlling something. The champagne stain on her dress had dried slightly at the edges. The center was still damp. Her phone had 17 unread messages. She didn't read any of them. What she was doing, standing on that sidewalk, was replaying the last 20 minutes with the precise, humorless attention of someone conducting a post-mortem. She was finding her mistakes, not because she felt guilty. Vanessa Crowe had not felt guilty about much of anything in a very long time, but because she needed to understand where her calculation had gone wrong. You couldn't fix what you didn't diagnose. She'd miscalculated the woman. That much was clear. She'd expected humiliation to produce submission. That was the formula. That had always been the formula, and she'd applied it successfully to dozens of women over the course of her career. Women who were newer to the room. Women who needed something from the room. Women who weren't yet sure enough of themselves to absorb a public wound without flinching. Nia Holloway had not flinched. That was the first miscalculation. The second miscalculation was Roman. Vanessa got into the car. She sat in the back seat without speaking to the driver, without giving a destination for almost a full minute. He was used to this. He didn't ask. Finally, she said, "Take me home." She spent the drive staring at the passing city through tinted glass. And what she was thinking about was not the dress or the lobby or the gasps of 50 people who would all be talking about tonight by morning. What she was thinking about was Roman Bellandi's face when he looked at Nia's wrist. She had watched his expression from 3 feet away. She had seen what was in it. It wasn't protectiveness, exactly. It was something older and quieter than that. Something that had been there for a while. Vanessa had been watching Roman Bellandi for 2 years. Not obsessively, she would have rejected that word with genuine offense. Strategically, Roman occupied a particular position in the ecosystem of New York wealth and power that made him relevant to her interests in specific ways. They moved in overlapping circles. They attended some of the same events. They had mutual connections, who occasionally served as intermediaries for the kind of arrangements that didn't get written down. And for 2 years, Vanessa had watched Roman move through rooms alone. Not lonely, not isolated. Roman Bellandi was never isolated. He was always surrounded by people, by the gravitational field of his own influence. But alone in the specific way of powerful men who hadn't yet met anyone worth the complication of letting in. She had thought, in the way that certain women think about certain men when they've been watching them long enough, that eventually this would change. That when it changed, the woman who benefited from that change would be someone from Roman's world. Someone who understood the architecture of it. Someone who had grown up adjacent to power and knew how to move inside it. Someone in her private imagination, more like Vanessa than like Nia. She got home at 11:37. She changed her dress. She poured herself 3 fingers of whiskey, a habit she maintained carefully and never mentioned in interviews about her leadership philosophy. Then she sat down at her desk and she started making a plan. 3 days after the Aurelius Hotel, Nia was in her office at 7:15 in the morning, which was normal. She got in before her staff, most days not to perform diligence for anyone's benefit, but because the early hours were the only hours where the city outside her window was quiet enough that she could think in straight lines. She had a large desk in a small office. The smallness was deliberate. She'd chosen the layout when she signed the lease 4 years ago, despite the fact that she could have taken a larger corner room. She liked the compression of it. She liked knowing exactly where everything was. On the desk, her laptop, a legal pad covered in her own handwriting, 2 phones, a coffee from the cart on the corner, run by a man named David who'd been there every morning since before she moved into the building, and the single succulent she'd had since she opened the firm. She was reviewing a risk analysis for a client in the manufacturing sector when her office manager, a 29-year-old named Priya, who had come to work for Nia 3 years ago and shown no signs of leaving, knocked twice and opened the door. "There's something on your desk you need to see." Priya set a printed page down and didn't move. It came in through the client portal. 3 separate submissions in the last hour. Nia looked at the page. It was a photograph. Or rather, it was something that had been assembled to look like a photograph. It showed Nia in what appeared to be a private meeting room, across a table from 2 men she recognized as clients, serious clients, long-term clients, the kind of accounts that had taken years to build. The angle suggested a surveillance photograph. The lighting was wrong in a way that was hard to name immediately, but that Nia's eye caught within seconds. Caption beneath it in a font designed to look like editorial text, the kind used in financial news outlets, read, "Sources confirm Holloway Financial gained access to institutional clients through organized crime connections. Multiple investors report introductions facilitated by criminal intermediary." Nia read it twice. Then she looked at Priya. "How many people have seen this? As of an hour ago? Unknown." It went to the client portal, which means whoever sent it had our submission form address. "That's not public." Nia set the page down flat on the desk. "Call Marcus." Marcus was her attorney. "Tell him I need him at 9. And pull the server logs from the portal. I want to know where the submissions originated." "Already running." Priya hesitated in the doorway. "Nia, there's a second one." Nia looked at her. Priya set another page on the desk. This one was different. It wasn't formatted like journalism. It was formatted like a personal communication, the kind of thing forwarded between contacts, given the false warmth of a private tip. It named 3 of Nia's clients directly. It suggested that their relationships with Holloway Financial were the result of introductions made through Roman Bellandi's network. It implied, without using explicit language, that Nia had traded access to Roman's connections for professional advancement. The implication was clear, and it was specifically cruel. She hadn't earned anything. Someone had handed it to her. And not just someone, the particular someone named guaranteed that the suggestion carried the maximum possible contamination. Nothing in the financial world was more lethal to a reputation for integrity than the suggestion of organized crime adjacency. Nia sat very still. Her coffee was getting cold. She didn't touch it. "Who received this one?" "It was forwarded to us by a client." Priya's voice was careful. "She received it from another contact. She wanted us to know before she decided how to respond." "Which client told her?" Nia nodded slowly. "The client was Margaret Osei, 63 years old, ran a mid-size investment group, had been with Holloway Financial for 4 years, and was the kind of client whose trust was not given lightly and not withdrawn without thought." The fact that Margaret had forwarded it, rather than simply pulling her account, said something. But it also said something that she felt the need to forward it at all. "Tell Margaret I'll call her personally before noon," Nia said. "And Priya?" "Yes. Don't say anything to the rest of the staff until I've talked to Marcus." Priya closed the door quietly. Nia picked up the second page and read it again. She read it with the same analytical attention she brought to financial documents. Look at financial documents, but at what it said on the surface, but at what it was designed to do. Structured. Where the weight of it fell. It was well constructed. She had to give it that. It didn't make accusations specific enough to be legally actionable. It worked entirely through implication and association. And it targeted the one thing that Nia's entire professional existence was built on, the perception that she had earned every single thing she had, through work and knowledge and years of accumulated expertise, without any assistance from any source that could be questioned. Strip that away, and you stripped away everything. Whoever had written this understood that. Whoever had written this knew her. Marcus arrived at 8:45. He was a compact, meticulous man, in his early 50s, who had been Nia's attorney since she incorporated the firm, and his reaction to crisis was to become very quiet and very focused in a way that Nia found stabilizing. He read both documents twice without speaking. Then he said, "These are surgical." "Yes." The photograph is edited. You can see it in the lighting differential on the background versus the foreground subjects, and there's a metadata fingerprint that will be traceable if we get a forensic analyst on it. The second document is harder. It's formatted as personal communication, so there's more plausible deniability built in. Can we trace the origin? Possibly. The portal submissions will have IP data. The forwarded communication depends on how many hands it passed through and how careful those hands were. He set the pages down. "Nia, how many clients have received these?" She looked at him steadily. "I don't know yet." He nodded. He was already writing on his legal pad. "Then we need to find out before we can calibrate the response." "Do you have any sense of who's behind this?" She didn't answer immediately. Marcus looked up from his notes. "You have a name," he said. It wasn't a question. "I have a direction," Nia said carefully. "I don't have proof yet. Then we get proof." He capped his pen. "In the meantime, have you told Roman Bellandi?" The question landed in the room with a particular weight. "No, you should. I know. If his name is being used as a weapon against you, he has a practical interest in helping you address it. He also has resources for this kind of investigation that we don't have." "I know," Nia said again. Her voice was level. "I'll talk to him." Marcus looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who understood that there was more happening here than what she was saying, and who also understood that pushing on it right now wasn't his job. "Call Margaret Chusey," he said. "Then call me with a count of how many clients have been contacted. We need a number before we can do anything else." He left at 9:20. Nia sat alone in her office. She called Margaret Osei at 9:25. Margaret answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been waiting. "Nia." "Margaret, thank you for sending that to me directly. I almost didn't." Margaret's voice was not unkind, but it was careful. She was a woman who had built her career on being careful. "I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to give me a direct answer." "Go ahead. Is there any truth to it?" The question was fair. Nia knew it was fair. It didn't make hearing it easier. "No," Nia said. "My client relationships predate any connection to Roman Bellandi. My firm's records document every introduction, every referral, every point of origin for every client account I carry. Those records are available for your review at any time, and I'll instruct Marcus to prepare a full disclosure package for you today, if that's useful." Silence on the line. "I believe you," Margaret said finally. But belief and business aren't always the same conversation." Another pause. "I've already had 2 calls this morning from people asking me about this. I'm going to have more. I need to be able to tell them something." "Tell them the truth," Nia said. "That you've worked with me for 4 years. That you've reviewed my work. That you know my record." "That's not always enough, Nia. You know that." She did know that. She had always known that. From the first day she walked into a boardroom as a woman without a powerful family name behind her, without an Ivy League network to vouch for her. The burden of proof that got assigned to her was different. It had always been different. You could have a spotless record and still have it called into question with the right whisper campaign if the whisper reached the right ears at the right moment. "Give me 2 weeks," Nia said. "I'm already working on documentation. If I can't show you something concrete in 2 weeks, I'll understand whatever decision you make." Another silence. 2 weeks, Margaret said. The call ended. Nia set the phone down. She sat there for a moment. Then she opened her desk drawer and took out a small notebook, not a legal pad, not a work journal, something smaller and more private that she'd kept for years, less for recording facts than for processing the ones that were hard to carry. Opened it to a blank page. She didn't write anything in it. She just held the pen over the page for a moment. And then she closed the notebook and put it back in the drawer and picked up her phone to make the next call. She called Roman at 10 minutes past 10. He answered before the first ring finished. "Nia, I need to see you." No preamble. She decided, on the walk from her desk to the window and back, that preamble was something she didn't have the energy for today. A beat of silence. Not surprised Roman didn't do surprise in any audible way. Just a small recalibration of whatever he'd been doing before she called. "When? Today. This afternoon if you can. Where?" She named a place, a coffee shop in Midtown, that had the dual virtue of being completely unremarkable and having tables positioned far enough apart for a conversation that needed privacy. It wasn't one of his places. It wasn't one of hers. It was just a room with coffee and distance from the people she didn't want listening. 2 o'clock, he said. 2 o'clock. She arrived at 1:50. He arrived at 1:52. They were the only two people in the place who were not looking at their phones. He sat down across from her and looked at her face and didn't say anything immediately. He developed, over the course of the months they'd known each other, a careful reading of her expressions. She didn't broadcast much. Her face was disciplined, in the way that faces become disciplined when they've spent years being read by people looking for weakness. But Roman had learned to read the margins of her composure, the small tensions. What he saw right now was controlled anger, which in Nika's particular emotional vocabulary was considerably more serious than anything louder. She pushed the printed pages across the table without speaking. He picked them up. He read them with an expression that didn't change. When he finished, he set them down flat on the table, the way she had done that morning in her office. He looked at the wall behind her for a moment. Then he looked at her. When did these come out? Started this morning. I don't have a full count yet on distribution. Client impact? 1 contract suspension as of this afternoon. More pending. He nodded slowly. Have you been contacted by anyone in the press? Not yet. She picked up her coffee cup, held it without drinking. But I expect that's coming. Roman was quiet for a moment. The coffee shop noise moved around them, the hiss of the machine, the murmur of other people's conversations, sounds of the city through the glass, and they sat in the particular silence of two people who were thinking hard and fast and hadn't reached the same conclusions yet. This is specific, Roman said. I know. The detail about client introductions that's not random. Someone knows enough about your business model to know where it hurts. I know that too. He looked at her directly. Do you know who? She met his gaze. I have a strong suspicion. I don't have proof. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger, exactly anger in Roman Bellandi operated below the surface, more like pressure than temperature. Tell me, not yet. She set the cup down. Roman, I need to be clear about something before we go further. He waited. I'm not asking you to fix this for me. He was quiet. I'm telling you because your name is in it, and you deserve to know that. And because if I'm right about who's doing this, your people are going to find out anyway, and I'd rather you hear it from me first. She looked at him steadily. But I'm not asking you to call someone. I'm not asking you to make a problem disappear. That's not the kind of help I need. The silence that followed was different from the earlier one. This one had tension in it. I mean it. He looked at the table, then at her. His jaw moved slightly, the way it did when he was managing something he wanted to say differently than the words that were coming out. What are you asking for then? Information. Your people can trace things mine can't. If you can find out where the photograph originated, the IP trail, the metadata, who paid for the distribution, I want that. Evidence, not outcomes. She paused. I want to handle the outcome myself. He was very still. She understood what it cost him to sit across from her with this information in his hands and not simply reach for the kind of solution that had always been available to him. She understood it, and she didn't soften what she was asking. She didn't soften it because she couldn't. Because the moment she let Roman Bellandi solve this problem in Roman Bellandi's way, everything she'd told him about herself, every dinner, every conversation, every careful and deliberate truth she'd offered him in that cramped Italian restaurant and at his parents' kitchen table would be reduced to the exact thing the photograph was trying to suggest she already was. Someone who moved through the world on borrowed power. She would rather burn down the firm herself than give that story an inch of truth. Roman looked at her for a long time. Evidence, he said finally. Evidence, another silence. All right. She exhaled slowly. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. His voice was quiet and not entirely without edge. If I find what I think I'm going to find, Nia, I need you to understand that my end of this is going to look different from yours. As long as it doesn't cross into anything I'd have to lie about later, I can live with different. He nodded. They sat for another 20 minutes. Going through what they each knew, building the outline of an investigation that ran on 2 parallel tracks, hers through Marcus and forensic documentation, his through channels she understood existed, and chose not to examine closely. When they left the coffee shop, they walked out separately, 3 minutes apart, She'd suggested it, he hadn't argued. She was back at her office by 4. She found Priya waiting outside her door with the expression of someone who had been doing math and didn't like the total. 3 more clients received the second document this afternoon, Priya said. 2 of them have put their accounts under review. Nia nodded. There's also a photographer outside the building. Been there since about 3 o'clock. Nia looked out the window at the end of the hallway. From here she could see the street below, and yes, a man with a long lens camera positioned near the entrance of the building across from theirs. Waiting. Get me the contact information for Elaine Park, Nia said. Priya blinked. The journalist? Yes. Nia, are you sure? If you talk to press right now before you have... I'm not talking to her. I'm establishing a relationship. She turned from the window. When I'm ready to talk, I want it to be with someone whose work I trust. Start with her. Priya wrote it down. Nia went back into her office and closed the door and sat at her desk and did not allow herself to process anything emotionally because she couldn't afford to yet. What she did instead was work. She pulled up every client file she had, every record of every introduction and referral, every documented point of origin for every professional relationship she'd built in 11 years, and she began assembling a timeline so complete and so thoroughly sourced that anyone who examined it would find it impossible to dismiss. It took her until 9:45 that night. When she finished, she sat back in her chair and looked at what she'd built. Then she thought about the woman in the hotel lobby who had held her champagne flute like a weapon and said 2 words like they were a verdict. She thought about the specific quality of Vanessa's smile when she'd thought Nia was going to pick up the napkin. The recognition hit her not like a revelation, but like a confirmation, the kind of knowing that had been forming in the back of her mind since morning, and now simply finished assembling itself. When she opened her desk drawer, she took out the small private notebook. She wrote 1 line. Then she closed it, put it back in the drawer, turned off her desk lamp, and picked up her coat. The photographer was still outside the building when she walked out. He raised his camera. She walked past him, without breaking stride, without looking at his lens, without giving him a single frame worth using. Roman's people found the first thread 4 days later. It was a payment, small enough to seem incidental, routed through 2 intermediate accounts in a chain that was designed to look like a normal operational expense for a small media consulting firm. The firm itself was real. It had a website, a registered address, 2 listed employees. But when Roman's accountant traced its client list, 1 name appeared 3 times in the relevant billing period. Crowe Foundation for Women's Leadership. Roman sat with that information for a full afternoon before he called Nia. When she answered, he said, I have something. How solid? Solid enough to build on. Not solid enough to move on yet. Send it to Marcus, already done. A pause. Roman. Yeah, how bad is it? He considered how to answer that honestly. It's a pattern. This isn't the first time she's done something like this. My people found 2 previous situations, different targets, different methods, but the same architecture. She builds these things carefully. She leaves herself room. Nia was quiet on the other end of the line. She's been doing this for years, Nia said. Not a question. Looks like. Another silence. Then she's made mistakes before, Nia said. And she got away with them because the targets didn't know how to look. Her voice was steady but tight in a specific way that Roman had learned to pay attention to. She assumed I wouldn't look either. She underestimated you. She underestimated what I'm willing to do to protect what I built. Nia's voice dropped slightly. Roman, I need more time. 2 weeks. Don't do anything until I've finished building the documentation case. He didn't answer immediately. Roman, I heard you. That's not the same as agreeing. 2 weeks, he said. The word came out flat and measured, the way words do when someone is disciplining what they actually want to say. 2 weeks, Nia. After that, we do this together. And I don't mean only through your lawyer. She understood what that meant. 2 weeks, she said. She hung up. She stood at her office window for a moment, looking at the city. The photographer was gone. He'd stopped coming 3 days ago, which suggested he either had what he needed or had been redirected. She thought about that. Then she thought about the timeline she'd built, the documentation, the forensic data Marcus was assembling. Then she thought about Vanessa Crowe organizing something else. Vanessa's, who had run a professional organization built on the language of empowerment while using that language as camouflage for the specific kind of cruelty that left no visible marks. 2 weeks, Nia had said. What she didn't know, what neither she nor Roman knew, on the night she stood at her office window, looking at the New York skyline, was that Vanessa had already accelerated her timeline. She had already made the call. She had already booked the photographers for the Aurelius Hotel. And she was already standing in her own apartment, holding her phone, looking at a confirmed event, listing for the Legacy Gala, and smiling the way she'd smiled in the lobby when she thought Nia was going to bend down and pick up the napkin. The same smile, the same certainty, the same catastrophic misreading of the woman she had decided, without evidence and without wisdom, that Vanessa had already decided she couldn't be stopped. That was the thing about people who had gotten away. With something, enough times they stopped being able to imagine a version of events where they didn't. It wasn't arrogance exactly. It was something more dangerous than arrogance. It was the deep, structural confidence of someone whose pattern had never failed them, who had run the same play in different costumes, across different stages, and watched it work every single time. She had done this before. Roman's people had found 2 previous cases. But Nia knew, sitting at her desk the morning after that phone call, that 2 was almost certainly an undercount. These things didn't start fully formed. They grew. They developed. Every time Vanessa had destroyed someone's reputation and walked away clean, she had learned something, refined something, added another layer of insulation between herself and the evidence. The Crowe Foundation was her masterpiece. Not because of what it did, the summits, the keynotes, the annual reports with their careful photography, but because of what it meant. It meant that Vanessa Crowe had built, over 20 years, public identity so specifically constructed around the language of women's empowerment and dignity that any accusation against her would have to climb over that identity first before it could reach her. She had made herself deliberately and systematically into the last person anyone would believe capable of what she was actually capable of. Nia understood this because she had spent 11 years in a world where the gap between reputation and reality was the most valuable real estate in business. She knew how to read it. She also knew, with the particular clarity that comes at 9 in the morning after a night of almost no sleep, that the 2 weeks she'd asked Roman for were already compromised. Because Vanessa hadn't waited. The call came from Priya at 6:47 in the morning, 4 days before the Aurelius Hotel Gala. Nia was already awake. She'd been awake since 4, which was becoming a pattern she didn't have the luxury of addressing yet. She was at her kitchen table with coffee, and the forensic documentation Marcus had compiled, going through it for the 4th time, looking for gaps. "You need to see this," Priya said. No greeting. Priya only skipped greetings when something was bad enough that pleasantry felt obscene. "Send it." It came through 30 seconds later. It was a video clip, 47 seconds long, posted to a financial industry news aggregator that Nia recognized, a platform that positioned itself as inside baseball, reporting for serious investors. Kind of outlet whose audience had money and whose content therefore carried specific weight in specific rooms. The aggregator had 240,000 subscribers. Its demographic was exactly Nia's client base. The clip was presented as industry source commentary and featured a man Nia had never seen before, late 40s, on-camera confident in the practiced way of someone who had done media before, identified only by the lower third graphic as former associate, Holloway Financial. She had never had an associate by that name. She had never had an associate who looked like this man. He spoke for 47 seconds about his concerns regarding the origin of certain client relationships at Holloway Financial, using the particular language of institutional finance that implied insider knowledge without specifying anything checkable. He didn't name Roman directly. He didn't have to. The implication was sewn into every sentence, like wire into a garment, invisible but structural. Nia watched it once. Then she called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. He'd already seen it. "The man in the clip," she said. "Who is he?" "We're running that now. He's not in any former employee records, which we already knew, but he has a LinkedIn profile that was created 8 months ago and has almost no activity. Profile photo is either stock or obscure enough to be untraceable at speed. I've got someone working on it." "The aggregator?" "I've sent a legal notice requesting the source documentation for the former associate claim. They'll stall, which is standard. But the notice creates a record." He paused. "Nia, The clip has 11,000 views already. It's been up for 3 hours. She set down her coffee cup. How fast does that number move? For this platform? With this audience? If it gets picked up by 2 or 3 larger outlets, we're looking at 6 figures by end of day. She stood up from the kitchen table and walked to the window. The city's outside was doing what it always did in the early morning, assembling itself, finding its rhythm, indifferent to her specifically. I need to move on Elaine Park today, she said. Nia, I'd counsel waiting until we have more of the documentation package. If I wait, the story gets written for me. Her voice was very quiet. The quieter it got, Marcus had learned, the more certain she was. I'd rather have a relationship with the journalist who's going to cover this than be a subject she's calling for comment. A beat. All right, Marcus said. But nothing on record until I've cleared the documentation. Understood. She called Priya next. Set up a meeting with Elaine Park. Today, if possible. Coffee informal. Not at my office. Then, without pausing, and I need everything we have on the Crowe Foundation's financials. Whatever's public record. Everything. Priya didn't ask why. She wrote it down. Elaine Park agreed to meet at noon. She was 44 years old and had spent 15 years writing about the intersection of money, power, and the people who moved between them. She had a reputation for 2 things: getting the story right and not being managed. Publicists and corporate communications teams across New York had spent years trying to manage Elaine Park and had, with varying degrees of grace, failed. She was already at the table when Nia arrived. Coffee ordered. Notepad on the table, but closed. Phone face down. The closed notepad was deliberate. Nia recognized it as a professional courtesy. I'm not recording this yet. I'm listening first. Thank you for meeting on short notice, Nia said, sitting down. I was going to reach out to you anyway. Elaine's voice was direct and completely without the social lubrication that most people applied to openings. I saw the aggregator clip this morning. So did most of my clients. What do you want me to know? Nia looked at her for a moment, assessing, the way she always assessed. Elaine returned the look without performing patience. She was simply present, waiting. I want you to know that the clip is fabricated, Nia said. The man in it was never employed by my firm in any capacity. I have 11 years of employment records that I'm prepared to make available for verification. The former associate designation is a fiction. That's provable? Documentably so. Elaine picked up her coffee cup. And the broader claim, the suggestion about how your client relationships were developed? Also false, also documentable. Nia kept her voice level. I have records going back to my first client. Every introduction, every referral, every professional relationship I've built, all of it sourced and time-stamped. None of it runs through Roman Bellandi's network because I didn't know Roman Bellandi existed until approximately 2 months ago. Elaine set her cup down. Something in her expression shifted, not skepticism exactly, more like a recalibration. The particular look of someone who had been operating on a partial picture and had just received a piece that changed the composition. You're telling me the timeline doesn't fit. The timeline makes it impossible. My client base was established before I ever spoke to him. The suggestion that he facilitated my access to institutional investors doesn't survive even a basic 6 chronological review. Who's behind the campaign? Nia looked at her steadily. I have a strong direction. I don't have everything I need to say it on record yet. How long until you do? Soon. Elaine studied her. Why come to me now then? If you're not ready to go on record with the source. Because I want you to understand the architecture of this. Before someone hands you a version of it, it's designed to look like a scoop. Nia leaned forward slightly. What's being done to me is not new. It's a pattern. There are previous targets. If you look at the right financial circles over the past several years, you'll find women whose professional reputations were damaged by whisper campaigns that shared some structural characteristics with what's happening to me now. Nobody connected them because nobody was looking for a connection. Elaine was very still. You're telling me there's a larger story. I'm telling you there might be, and that if there is, the documentation for it is being assembled right now, and you'll have access to it before anyone else. A silence. In exchange for what? Elaine asked. Not aggressively. Just precisely. In exchange for the story being told accurately when it's ready to be told. Nia sat back. I'm not asking you to hold anything. If you find something before I bring it to you, write it. I'm asking for a relationship, not a favor. Elaine looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked up her notepad. "Tell me about the previous targets," she said. The meeting ran 90 minutes. When Nia left the restaurant, she walked 2 blocks before she stopped at a corner, leaned against a building wall, and allowed herself exactly 45 seconds to be tired, not to fall apart, not to process anything she couldn't afford to process. In the middle of a Tuesday afternoon on a midtown sidewalk, just to stand still and let the weight of the morning settle into her bones for 45 seconds before she picked it back up and kept moving. She had learned this technique at 24, during the first real crisis of her professional life, a client who had accused her of mismanaging funds and a complaint that turned out to be completely without merit, but that had taken 8 months and most of her savings to disprove. 8 months of walking into rooms where people had heard the accusation and were waiting to see if it stuck. 8 months of keeping her voice level and her documentation tight and her public face completely intact, while privately running on something close to pure fear. She had survived that. She was going to survive this. She pushed off the wall and kept walking. Her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail. She'd been doing that more in the past week, screening everything through Priya unless the caller was on a specific short list. But something made her answer. Nia Holloway. The voice was male. Careful. The particular careful of someone reading from a script they'd written themselves. "My name isn't important. What's important is that I have information you need about the Crowe Foundation, about what's coming next." She stopped walking. "How did you get this number?" "The same way the photographs got to your clients." A pause. "That's actually why I'm calling." Her heart rate shifted. Not dramatically. A quiet internal adjustment. "I'm listening." There's a third piece. The photographs and the video were preparation. The third piece goes out at the Aurelius Gala. Friday night. She's not just planning to humiliate you in person, she's arranged for photographers. Not event photographers. People. With specific instructions about what to shoot and how to frame it. Another pause. She wants footage of you responding emotionally. Anything she can use to say you're unstable. To add to the existing narrative, Nia stood on the sidewalk and felt something cold move through her. "Why are you telling me this?" A long pause. "Because I built the second document." His voice was flat. No apology in it. No attempt to soften what he was saying. "I do this work. Reputation management. The kind that goes in the other direction. I take contracts. I took hers." He stopped. "She told me the target was a financial fraudster. Someone who'd built a career on stolen introductions and was about to be exposed. I do my due diligence, but I don't." He stopped again. "I pulled your records last night. All public. Your client history doesn't fit what she told me. The chronology alone doesn't fit," Nia said. "No." She let the silence sit for a moment. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing. I'm done with this contract as of this call." His voice shifted slightly. "I can't undo what I built, but I can tell you what's coming." He told her. All of it. The photographers. The angles they'd been briefed to capture. The specific narrative Vanessa intended to build out of the footage. The contact at a second media outlet, larger than the aggregator, who was expecting to receive the material within hours of the event and had already agreed to run it under a particular framing that Vanessa had provided in writing. When he finished, Nia said, "Can you document any of this?" "Some of it. The communication about the photographers. Not the media contact that was verbal. Send what you have to this address." She gave him Marcus's secure email. "And I need your name." Another long pause. "David Reyes," he said. He hung up. Nia stood on the sidewalk. A bus went past. 3 people walked around her without looking up. The city maintained its complete indifference to the specific geography of her crisis. She had 4 days until the gala. She called Marcus. "I just got new information," she said when he answered. "We're moving faster than we thought. And I need you to pull everything on a David Reyes, reputation management, probably operating under a consultancy name. He's going to send you documentation within the hour." "Nia, what happened?" "Someone on Vanessa's team just defected. She started walking again. We have the third phase of the campaign. We have it before it launches." Silence. "That changes our position significantly," Marcus said. "I know. If the documentation he sends is solid." "I know, Marcus." She turned a corner. "Start drafting the disclosure package for Elaine Park. I want it ready to deliver by Thursday." "And the gala?" If she's got photographers, positions, then I'm going to be at that gala. Nia's voice was quiet and completely steady. And I'm going to give those photographers something entirely different from what Vanessa briefed them to capture. She told Roman that night, not over the phone. She drove to a place they'd used twice before, not his territory, not hers, a restaurant in Brooklyn that belonged to a retired couple from Palermo who didn't know Roman's name and didn't care. She got there first. He arrived 7 minutes later. She told him everything. The tip-off, David Reyes, photographers, the media contact, the third phase. Roman listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his water glass, looked at it, set it down without drinking. She moved up her timeline, he said, or she never planned to give us 2 weeks to begin with. Nia looked at him. The gala was always the real play. The photographs and the video were softening. She wanted my clients rattled before she went for the footage. She wanted me defensive, reactive, maybe desperate enough to say something at that event that she could use. Roman's jaw worked slightly. She knows you were investigating her, he said. Nia looked at him. What? She moved up her timeline, he said again, and this time the quiet in his voice had a different quality. Harder. That means she knew you had started looking. Someone told her. He looked at the table. My side of this has more people than yours does. If there's a leak, Roman, I'm not saying it's definite. I'm saying it's possible. The table between them felt suddenly larger than it was. She studied his face. He was doing the same thing she'd seen him do only a handful of times, that particular internal inventory, going through people and possibilities with the unsentimental efficiency of someone who had learned, young and hard, that loyalty was a thing that got tested and sometimes failed. How many people on your end know what we're doing, she asked. 4. He said it immediately. My accountant, who found the payment trail, 2 men who handled the IP trace, and 1 person who coordinated with your lawyer. Any of them have a reason to benefit from Vanessa knowing? He was quiet for a long moment. It was the longest she had ever seen Roman Bellandi go quiet, when a direct question was on the table. There's 1 person, he said finally, who has a connection I didn't think was relevant until right now. Nia waited, he told her. It was a name she didn't know. A man named Caruso, who had worked for Roman's family for 11 years, and who had, it turned out, a sister who sat on the board of the Crowe Foundation. Not a major position. Not someone with visible influence. The kind of position that was easy to miss if you weren't looking for it, which Roman hadn't been, because 11 years of loyalty is a long time to build the habit of not looking. The silence that followed this information was the worst kind, the kind that contains a reckoning neither person is ready for, but both people can see coming. He didn't have access to everything, Roman said. Not defensively, just precisely. But he knew we were looking at the foundation's financials. He knew we had the payment trail. That's enough, Nia said. Yes. She pressed her fingers flat against the table. She could feel the wood grain under her fingertips. And she focused on that physical sensation for a moment because she needed something solid and specific while her mind ran the implications. Someone inside Roman's circle had warned Vanessa, which meant Vanessa had known for at least several days that the investigation existed, which meant every day Nia had spent building her documentation case, believing she had time, believing the 2-week window was intact. Vanessa had been watching her build it and accelerating around her. The photographs, the video, the fake former associate, the media contact, the gala photographers. None of it was improvised. It was a counter-campaign, running parallel, designed to hit critical mass before Nia's evidence assembled into anything deployable. She's been ahead of us, Nia said, for days, maybe longer. Roman's voice was controlled in the way of someone who was holding something very tightly. Caruso is being dealt with. That's not your concern. I'm not asking about Caruso. She looked at him directly. I'm asking what this means for Friday. He met her eyes. It means she's going to the gala expecting to find someone who is already half destroyed and doesn't know the 3rd phase is coming. His voice was steady, but the pressure underneath it was audible now, like water behind glass. She thinks she has the element of surprise. She doesn't anymore. No. Nia looked at the table. Then she said something she had been thinking since she hung up with David Reyes that afternoon, standing on a midtown sidewalk with the cold working its way through her coat. something she had been turning over for hours, examining from every angle, looking for the place where it fell apart. It didn't fall apart. "I'm going to the gala," she said, not to react to what she's planned, to preempt it. She looked up at Roman. "Everything she's built is predicated on me being on the defensive, on being the subject of a story she's writing. I'm going to show up having already written a different one." Roman looked at her. "The documentation for Elaine Park is almost ready," she continued. "Marcus can have it deliverable by Thursday evening. I'm going to call Margaret Osei tonight and tell her what's coming and what I have. I'm going to call every client who's been contacted, and I'm going to tell them myself before Friday so that when they're approached for comment by whatever media contact Vanessa is using, they've already heard my version." She paused. "And at that gala, I am going to walk in, do my work, speak to the people I plan to speak to, and give those photographers nothing. Absolutely nothing she can use. And if she confronts you directly," Nia looked at him. "Then she confronts me directly," she said. "And everybody there watches what happens." Roman was quiet. Then, with the specific quality of a man who understood exactly what it felt like to be the one deciding how a confrontation ended, and who was choosing, with great deliberateness, to let someone else make that choice. "What do you need from me?" "Nothing at the gala. Stay away from it." He blinked. Of everything she'd said, that one landed differently. "Nia, if you're there, it validates every implication she's made about me. It becomes the story." She held his gaze. "I need to be in that room as myself, not as someone under your protection." She paused. "I know you can do this. I'm asking you to trust that I can do it without you." The silence was very long. Roman Bellandi had spent 35 years in a world where the answer to someone threatening something you valued was never to step back, never to stay away. The idea of sitting somewhere else on Friday night, while Vanessa Crowe's photographers waited in the gala of the Aurelius Hotel, was genuinely and specifically the hardest thing she could have asked him to do. She knew that. She was asking anyway. "All right," he said. His voice was so quiet, she almost asked him to repeat it. "All right," he said again. "Clearer." She nodded. She reached across the table, briefly, and put her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held hers for a moment. Then she pulled back and picked up at the menu and said, "I haven't eaten since this morning, and I can't do what I need to do tonight on an empty stomach." And that was the end of the most important conversation they'd had. They ordered food. They ate. They talked about other things. Briefly, she asked about his mother. He asked about the client in the manufacturing sector, whose risk analysis she'd been working on the morning everything started. The conversation was surface level, and both of them knew it, and neither of them pretended otherwise. They were two people sitting together in a restaurant in Brooklyn, storing up something quiet before a storm. She left at 9:40. He walked her to her car. At the driver's door, she turned and looked at him. "If this goes wrong," she said, "it won't. But if it does." He looked at her. "Then we figure out the next thing. That's what you do." She looked at him for a moment. Then she got in the car. She drove home through the Brooklyn streets, through the tunnel, into Manhattan, and all the way back to her apartment. She was running through what she needed to do in the next 72 hours, organizing it the way she organized everything, by urgency, by dependency, by what happened if each piece failed. At 11:15, she sat down at her kitchen table with a fresh legal pad. She wrote for 2 hours. When she finally went to bed at 1:20 in the morning, the legal pad had 4 pages of dense, specific notes that together constituted the most important strategic plan she had ever built. Not because of what it would do to Vanessa Crowe, but because of what it required her to become to execute it. Not smaller, not louder, not harder in the way that years of underestimation could make a person hard if they weren't careful. Something else. Something she had been approaching for a long time without knowing it had a name. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about a woman who had decided, without evidence and without wisdom, that Nia Holloway was someone who could be taken apart. Then she closed her eyes. And on Friday morning, she put on the emerald gown and drove herself to the Aurelius Hotel and walked Dyphon through the lobby doors into the room where Vanessa Crowe was already waiting, already smiling, already holding a white dinner napkin with the absolute certainty of a woman who had never once imagined the possibility that the person she'd chosen to destroy was already 3 moves. She was already 3 moves ahead. That Was the thing Vanessa Crowe would never understand, not that night in the lobby, not in the days that followed, not even later when she finally had enough distance to look back and try to understand where it had gone wrong. She would spend a long time believing she had lost because of Roman, because of resources she didn't have access to, because of some external force that had intervened in what should have been a clean and final outcome. She would never understand that she had lost in Nia's kitchen at 1:20 in the morning on a legal pad, 72 hours, before either of them walked into the Aurelius Hotel. Thursday had been the longest day. Nia made 11 phone calls between 7 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. Every client who had received the fabricated documents, every account that had gone under review. She called each one personally, not Priya, not Marcus, not a prepared statement read by an assistant. Her voice, her words, direct. She told them what was coming Friday night. She told them about the photographers. She told them about the media contact Vanessa had positioned. She told them that by Saturday morning they would receive, from Marcus's office, a complete disclosure package containing 11 years of sourced client records, the forensic analysis of the edited photograph, the documented payment trail between the Crowe Foundation and the reputation management firm, and David Reyes's signed statement. Most of them listened without interrupting. Margaret O.C., who was the seventh call, said, "You should have called me the first morning." "I know," Nia said. "I needed more before I could give you something solid. You had 4 years of solid." A pause. "I should have said that louder when I got the document. Instead, I asked you to prove something you should never have had to prove to me." Nia was quiet for a moment. "I'm not angry at you for asking," she said finally. "I understand why you asked. You shouldn't have to understand that." "No, but I do anyway." She heard Margaret exhale on the other end of the line. "My account is not under review," Margaret said. "Consider that statement retroactive to the morning I called you." Nia closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. "Thank you, Margaret." The 11th call ended at 4:17. At 4:30, she delivered the disclosure package to Elaine Park. Not the final version, though, out Saturday morning, but enough. Enough for Elaine to spend Thursday night building the architecture of the story she was going to write, so that when the documentation arrived in full, she could move fast. Elaine read the first 20 pages while Nia sat across from her in the same unremarkable coffee shop. Page 12, she looked up and said, "This is going to be a significant story." "I know. Not just about you." Elaine tapped the page. "If the pattern holds across the previous targets." "It holds." Nia looked at her steadily. "I have contact information for 2 of them. They've agreed to speak to you. Not on record yet, but enough to verify the structural similarities." Elaine was quiet for a moment. "Why did you come to me specifically?" she asked. Nia considered the question honestly. "Because you've never written a story that was handed to you, fully formed, and printed it without looking underneath it first." She paused. "Whatever Vanessa's media contact is planning to publish this weekend, I needed the real story to be somewhere. It would be written by someone who understands the difference between a source and a plant." Elaine looked at her for a long moment. Then she turned to page 13. Friday morning arrived with the particular quality of mornings that have been anticipated too long, slightly unreal, slightly too bright, the air carrying that charged stillness that sits before something breaks. Nia was up at 5. She didn't review the legal pad again. She'd done that enough. She knew what was on it. Instead, she made coffee and sat at her kitchen table and did something she almost never did in crisis nothing. For 20 minutes, she just sat with the coffee and the quiet and the city waking up as outside her window, and she let herself feel the specific weight of what was coming without trying to manage it. She was tired. She had been tired for 2 weeks. Not the tiredness that sleep fixes, but the deeper kind, the kind that comes from spending extended time in a posture of sustained defense, from holding yourself together with concentration and will while something tries to take you apart. She felt it that morning. She let herself feel it. Then she finished the coffee, washed the cup, and went to get dressed. The emerald gown was on a hanger on the back of her closet door. Mrs. Patterson had delivered it Tuesday with a small adjustment to the left shoulder seam. Unprompted, she'd noticed it during the last fitting and fixed it on her own initiative. Nia had paid her twice what she asked. Mrs. Patterson had tried to argue. Nia had not engaged with the argument. She put on the dress. She looked at herself in the mirror for exactly as long as it took to confirm that everything was where it should be. Then she picked up her bag and drove herself to the Aurelius Hotel. She arrived at 7:38. The lobby was already populated. The gala was scheduled for 8, but these events always started filling earlier, the professional social hour that preceded the official one. Men in black tie, women in gowns of varying ambition. The particular orchestrated noise of wealthy people networking with the careful disguise of enjoying themselves. Nia knew where the cameras were within 45 seconds of entering. Not the official event photographers. She'd identified those immediately, stationed at predictable intervals along the main sightlines. She was looking for the others, the ones David Reyes had described. 2 men, he'd said, dressed as event guests, long lenses in bags or coats, positioned for angles that captured emotional responses rather than the composed shots of official coverage. She found the first one near the bar. Late 30s, dark jacket that was slightly too casual for the event, positioned with a clear line to the lobby's central floor area. His drinks sat untouched on the bar beside him. Nobody let their drinks sit untouched at these things, unless they were managing their hands for a reason. She found the second one, 7 minutes later, near the east corridor entrance. Similar posture, similar untouched drink. He was wearing a gala wristband that was on his right wrist, where most right-handed people didn't naturally place it, which meant he'd put it on quickly, without thinking. She noted their positions. She adjusted her route through the room accordingly. Not obviously, not in any way that suggested she was avoiding anything. She moved through the space the way she always moved through spaces, with the calm, specific purposefulness of someone who knew where she was going and had decided in advance that the room was going to accommodate her rather than the reverse. She found the group of investors she'd arranged to meet. 3 people, a woman who ran an impact investment fund in Connecticut, a man who had built a regional bank from a community credit union over 20 years, and a younger woman who was developing a new kind of municipal finance structure in cities that traditional capital had written off. Nia had wanted this meeting for months. She had scheduled it 3 weeks ago, before any of this started. She was not going to let Vanessa Crowe take this meeting from her. They talked for 40 minutes. Real conversation. Not networking performance, actual conversation about risk structures and capital allocation, and the specific problem of building financial instruments for communities that institutional investors had systematically underfunded. Nia knew this material the way she knew her own name. She didn't have to perform expertise. She just talked. The younger woman, her name was Jade. She was 28 and had the particular energy of someone who had been the smartest person in most rooms since childhood and had stopped being self-conscious about it. Said, at one point, "I've read your framework paper on tiered community lending. The section on risk adjustment methodology, I've been using it in presentations for 6 months. Nia looked at her. "I wrote that paper at 2 in the morning during a flight delay in Atlanta," she said. "I'm glad it was useful." Jade laughed. It was a genuine laugh. The Connecticut fund manager, whose name was Patricia, and who had the careful eyes of someone who had survived 30 years in an industry that hadn't been designed with her in mind, said, "I heard there's been some noise this week about your firm." The table went slightly quieter. Nia looked at Patricia directly. "There has been," she said. "It's fabricated. The documentation proving that is being released tomorrow morning." She paused. "But I appreciate you asking directly, instead of pretending you hadn't heard." Patricia held her gaze for a moment, and she nodded. "Good," she said. "I don't like noise." "Neither do I," Nia said. And she meant it with an entirety that had nothing performative in it. The conversation continued. She was 20 minutes deep into a discussion about municipal bond structure when she felt it a shift in the lobby's ambient attention. That particular change in collective awareness, that means someone has entered a space and the space has noticed. Vanessa Crowe had arrived. Nia didn't look up immediately. She finished her sentence. She let the response come from the community finance developer who was making a point about secondary market liquidity. She tracked the point, responded to it briefly, and then naturally, as part of a scan of the room that any person in conversation might make, she looked in the direction of the entrance. Vanessa was wearing white. It was a deliberate choice. Nia understood that immediately. White at a black tie gala was a statement, a refusal to blend. a declaration of centrality. It said, "I am the event. Everything else is context." She looked composed, more composed than she'd looked in the hotel 3 weeks ago, which meant she had time to prepare, which meant she'd slept this week better than Nia had. Vanessa's eyes moved across the lobby with the practiced efficiency of someone taking an inventory. They found Nia. The distance between them was maybe 60 feet. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Vanessa smiled. That specific, assured smile. The one that meant she had already decided how this ended. Nia held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then she turned back to the table. "Where were we?" she said. "Secondary market," Jade said. Nia picked up the thread without missing a beat. The liquidity problem in secondary markets for municipal instruments is actually solvable if you change the unit of analysis from individual bonds to pools structured around. She kept talking. Behind her, at a distance of 60 feet, Vanessa Crowe watched this with an expression that shifted through several registers before settling on something that looked, to anyone paying close attention, less like confidence and more like recalculation. The napkin drop happened at 8:42. Nia had known it was coming. She'd known it was coming in the specific way you know a thing when you've been told about it by someone who helped plan it and then thought better of the plan. But David Reyes had said Vanessa intended a confrontation, public, witnessed, something that would give her photographers their material. What she hadn't known was the napkin. That was spontaneous. That was Vanessa in the moment, reading the room, finding the specific instrument of her cruelty, the way certain people find them instinctively, the way it comes natural to them, because they've been doing it so long it's become reflex. The white dinner napkin hit the floor at Nia's feet. "Pick it up." And Nia felt it. She felt the full weight of those 3 words, not just the words themselves, but everything beneath them. Every room she'd ever walked into, where someone had made a calculation about her before she spoke. Every client who had tested her before trusting her. Every year of building something from nothing, while people watched to see if she'd slip. Every morning, she'd gotten up and driven herself and done the work without anyone handing her anything. All of it was in those 3 words. She looked at the napkin. She looked at Vanessa, and she bent down. She could feel the room go tight around her. Could feel 50 people holding a collective breath. Could feel the 2 photographers shift their weight, adjusting angles. Could feel Vanessa's certainty radiating outward like heat. She picked up the napkin. She stood back up. She reached out and dipped one corner of it into Vanessa's champagne. Then she pressed the soaked cloth against the front of the white silk dress. "Now you can pick it up." The lobby erupted in gasps that people immediately tried to suppress because this was that kind of room, and then failed to suppress because what they'd just watched was too specifically satisfying for suppression to hold. Vanessa's hand shot out and grabbed Nia's wrist. Tight. Too tight. The grab of a woman who had lost control of the situation and was reaching for the only thing she could still physically grasp. Nia felt the pressure of it. She held very still, and then the crowd moved, and Roman walked through the lobby. He wasn't supposed to be there. That was the first thing Nia registered. The second thing she registered was that he'd seen the marks on her wrist from 20 feet away, and the particular quality of his stillness as he covered the remaining distance was she had never seen in him before, and hoped sincerely not to see again. Let her go. Vanessa's hand opened immediately, involuntarily, completely, like a circuit that had been interrupted. Roman looked at Nia's wrist for a moment. Then he looked at Vanessa. "You put your hands on someone under my protection." Vanessa's composure was cracking in real time. Nia could see it happening. The flush working up from her throat, the jaw tightening, the eyes going slightly too bright with the desperate energy of someone trying to locate a version of this situation where they still controlled the outcome. "She humiliated me," Vanessa said, in front of everyone. Roman looked at her. "No," he said, "you humiliated yourself." Vanessa turned and walked. The lobby rearranged itself. But Roman stayed beside Nia. And Nia looked at him with an expression she kept very controlled, because this was not the place to have the conversation that his presence required. "You were supposed to stay away," she said, very quietly, under the resumed noise of the room. "I know, Roman. I stayed away until she grabbed you." His voice was equally quiet, flat in the way of someone who has made a decision and is finished negotiating it. "That's where I drew the line." Nia looked at him for a moment. She wanted to argue, She had the argument ready. She'd had it ready since Tuesday. The fully formed case for why his presence validated the narrative, why the story needed to be hers alone, why showing up here was the one thing she'd specifically asked him not to do. She looked at his face. She looked at the way he was standing. She put the argument down. Okay, she said. His shoulders dropped very slightly. Just a fraction. The photographers, she said. 2 of them. Bar area and East Corridor. Don't look. Already saw them. Don't engage. I wasn't planning to. She almost said something else. Instead, she said, I have a meeting I need to get back to. Then go. She went. But Vanessa Crowe didn't leave. That was what nobody expected. The lobby confrontation had been witnessed by 60-odd people, recorded on a dozen personal phones by the time she walked away, and was already circulating on 2 social platforms within the hour. The rational response, the response of anyone with functional self-preservation instincts, would have been to leave the event and manage the fallout from somewhere private. Vanessa didn't leave. She went to the bathroom, composed herself, and reappeared 20 minutes later. Nia didn't know this until her phone buzzed with a message from Priya, who was monitoring social media from her apartment. She's still there. East Wing. Talking to people. Looks like she's working the room. Nia read the message. Then she understood. This was still the play. The photographers were still positioned. The media contact was still expecting footage by end of evening. Vanessa had simply recalculated what she needed. From the night the lobby confrontation had already happened, was already circulating, and now she needed to be seen as the composed, dignified party who had been provoked and recovered. She needed the footage to show Nia as the aggressor. The champagne-soaked dress, Roman's intervention, the whole sequence, reframed, recontextualized, stripped of the setup, and presented as a moment of unprovoked aggression by a woman whose associations with organized crime were already a matter of public speculation. Nia saw it clearly. She put her phone away. She found Patricia, the Connecticut fund manager, near the east side of the room. I need to ask you something, Nia said, and it's a significant ask. Patricia looked at her. Go ahead. There's a room in the East Conference Wing. I have access to it through the event organization. I have 40 minutes of material I want to present to a small group, not officially on the program. She paused. I need people in that room who have heard my name this week and are willing to hear me out before they decide what they think. Patricia studied her face. How many people are you looking to have in that room? Whatever you can get me in the next 45 minutes. A silence. Patricia said, I'll make 3 calls. She made 5. The East Conference Room at the Aurelius held 40 people at capacity. Nia had it set up with a projector connected to her laptop and a table with water. No catering, no event branding, nothing that made it look like anything other than what it was. 22 people came. Not all of them were clients. Several were people she'd never met, colleagues of the ones Patricia had called, people who had heard the noise about Holloway Financial this week and wanted to see what the principal had to say for herself. One of them, she noticed, was a man she recognized from his byline, a financial journalist for a publication, 3 times the size of the aggregator that had run the fake former associate clip. She didn't acknowledge him specifically. She plugged in her laptop. She stood in front of 22 people in an emerald gown with her heels on the carpeted floor and the projector light on her face, and she said, I'm going to show you 11 years of documentation, and it's going to take 35 minutes. At the end, I'll answer every question in the room. If anything I show you doesn't hold up, tell me where, and I'll address it in real time. If it does hold up, I'm asking you to remember what you saw here when you read the story that comes out tomorrow morning. Nobody left. She talked for 37 minutes, not 35. 37, because 2 people asked questions mid-presentation that she answered in full rather than deferring, and she didn't apologize for the extra 2 minutes or try to rush. She moved through the documentation with the same precision she brought to every client presentation she had ever given, sourced, specific, chronological, airtight. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then the bank builder, the man who had taken a community credit union and made it a regional bank over 20 years, said, Who built the smear campaign? Nia looked at him. The documentation names a source, she said. The full release goes out tomorrow morning. I'd rather you read it there than hear me say the name in a conference room tonight. Fair, he said. The financial journalist, who had been silent through the entire presentation, said, "I'll be requesting comment from the Crowe Foundation before I publish anything." Nia looked at him. "That's your job," she said. "Do it." He nodded. He was already writing. At 10:15, Nia walked back into the main lobby. The event was thinning, the formal part of the evening had ended, and the room was in the graceful dissolution of its final hour. People were collecting coats and finishing conversations, and doing the careful social accounting of who they'd spoken to and who they still needed to reach before the night ended. Vanessa was at the center of the lobby. She was speaking to a small group, 3 people Nia didn't recognize. She was composed, animated even, using her hands the way she did on panels, and keynotes an expansive, confident, the body language of a woman in her natural element. Whatever she was saying, it had the cadence of a story, a narrative she was constructing in real time. One of her photographers was still positioned near the bar. Nia saw all of this in the time it took her to cross from the east corridor entrance to the lobby's main floor. She felt Roman nearby before she located him, that particular awareness she'd developed over months of dinners and conversations and 2 weeks of crisis that told her where he was in a room the way you know the location of a sound source before you turn toward it. He was near the lobby's north wall, not central, not visibly positioned, just present. She didn't go to him. She stood at the center of the lobby floor. Vanessa noticed her, their eyes connected at across 30 feet of marble and ambient light, and the wreckage of an evening that had not gone the way either of them had planned. Vanessa said something to the group she was talking to, a brief word, an excuse, and moved away from them. She walked toward Nia. Nia waited. Vanessa stopped 5 feet from her. They stood there, the 2 of them, in the diminishing crowd of the Aurelius lobby, and the space between them was filled with everything that had happened over the past 2 weeks, and before it, the photographs and the video and the planted story, and the leaked investigation and the hotel confrontation, and 22 people in a conference room and 11 years of documentation, and a payment trail that led directly from one woman's foundation to the machinery of the other woman's near destruction. "You should have stayed away tonight," Vanessa said. Her voice was controlled even. "I had meetings scheduled," Nia said. "I mean it as advice." "I know you do." Nia looked at her. "What I'm curious about is whether you think you still have the leverage to give it." Vanessa's jaw tightened, just slightly. The first crack in the composed surface. "You think tonight changes anything?" Her voice dropped. Not loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "You think one conference room presentation undoes what's already in circulation? Tomorrow morning there will be coverage from 2 outlets that will." "One outlet," Nia said. Vanessa blinked. "The second one dropped the story at 9:45 tonight," Nia said. "I'm told the editor received a call from a source with documentation contradicting the materials your contact provided. They're not comfortable with the sourcing." She paused. "One outlet is still going to run something, but what it runs and what you expected it to run are going to be different things." Vanessa stared at her. "How the journalist who was in my conference room tonight works for a publication that the outlet's editorial team takes very seriously." Nia kept her voice level, not triumphant, just accurate. "He's filing a story tonight. They wanted to see what he had before. They committed to the competing version." The silence between them had a different quality now. Quality of air when pressure changes before a storm. Vanessa's composure was working very hard. "You have no idea what I can still do," she said. And Nia looked at her, for the first time that evening, without a tactical purpose, without measuring angles or managing information. She looked at Vanessa Crowe and she saw something she hadn't expected to see. Fear, not the performed outrage of the lobby confrontation, not the calculated fury of someone losing a game. Actual human fear. The fear of someone who had built an identity so carefully and protected it completely and for so long that the idea of its collapse was not merely a professional reversal, but something closer to an existential. Nia looked at Vanessa Crowe's fear and felt nothing she had expected to feel. Not satisfaction, not relief, not the particular vindication, not the befuddlement she had imagined during the worst nights of the past 2 weeks might arrive if she ever reached this moment. What she felt instead was something quieter and considerably more complicated, the specific exhaustion of someone who has been in a fight for long enough that winning and losing have both lost their clean edges. She looked at Vanessa for a long moment. Then she said, Go home, Vanessa. Not cruel, not triumphant. Just the words, said plainly, the way you tell someone something true that they already know and have been avoiding. Vanessa stared at her. Her mouth opened slightly. Whatever she had prepared to say next, whatever the next line of the script was, the one she'd written for this moment, the comeback, the threat, the final repositioning, it didn't come out. Because Nia's face wasn't giving her anything to push against. No anger to weaponize. No visible wound to press on. Just a woman in an emerald gown, looking at her with the steady, unimpressed attention of someone who had already moved past this moment, even while standing in it. That, more than anything else that had happened tonight, unmade Vanessa. She turned. She walked out of the Aurelius Hotel lobby without speaking to anyone else. Her coat was collected at the coat check by a young woman who didn't know what had just happened in the lobby and smiled automatically as she handed it over. Vanessa took it without responding and went through the doors and was gone. The photographer near the bar lowered his camera. He'd been there for 3 hours and had very little worth keeping. Roman was beside Nia within 30 seconds of Vanessa's exit. He didn't say anything immediately. He stood beside her and looked at the doors Vanessa had gone through. And Nia could feel the particular quality of his silence, the kind that means someone has been holding something at a specific tension for several hours and is only now beginning to release it. She's done, Nia said. Not to Roman specifically, more to the air. A statement of fact she was making to herself as much as anyone. For tonight, Roman said. She looked at him. For tonight, she agreed. Tomorrow's a different calculation. He nodded. She looked at his face. He looked tired. Not in any dramatic way. Roman didn't do dramatic fatigue. But there was something around the edges of him that she recognized. Because she'd seen it in her own mirror this week. The subtle erosion that extended alertness produces in a person, the way sustained vigilance costs something that sleep only partially refunds. You came anyway, she said. I did. You said you wouldn't. I said I'd stay away from the gala. He looked at her. I stayed away from the gala for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Then your wrist was in her hand. Nia was quiet. I'm not apologizing for it, he said. I know. But he stopped. Started differently. If it cost you something, tonight. With the narrative, with what you were trying to... It didn't, she said. The phones caught what they caught. My presentation was already done. The journalist was already filing. She paused. If anything, what people saw you do in this lobby is going to make the story more interesting, and Vanessa's position more complicated. Because you didn't threaten her. You didn't touch her. You just told her to let go of someone she was hurting, and told her the truth about what she'd done. She looked at him steadily. That's not a bad thing to have on video. He looked at her for a moment. You could have led with that, he said. I could have, she agreed, but I was still a little angry at you. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. The version of a smile that Roman Bellandi had, which was mostly in his eyes and barely reached in his mouth and lasted about 2 seconds. She looked away before it finished. Take me home, she said. She slept for 9 hours. That was unusual enough that when she woke up at 9:43 on Saturday morning and looked at her phone and understood the time, her first response was a brief, animal panic, the reflex of someone who had been operating on 4 hours of sleep for 2 weeks and whose system now interpreted rest as dereliction. She sat up fast. Her heart was already going. Then the reality of Saturday settled over her. The gala was last night. The documentation was already sent. Elaine Park was already writing. There was nothing she needed to be doing right now at 9:43 in the morning except being awake. She lay back down. She stared at the ceiling for about 10 minutes. Then she got up and made coffee and sat at her kitchen table and looked at her phone. 17 messages. She put the phone face down. She drank the coffee. She looked at the window. Outside, the city was what it did on Saturday mornings, moving slower, softer, with the particular quality of a thing that has briefly loosened its grip on itself. She thought about the 22 people in the conference room last night, about Patricia's 5 phone calls, about Margaret O.C.'s retroactive statement, about the financial journalist who had been quiet and attentive for 37 minutes and had already composing the first paragraph of something. She thought about 11 years, about the first client she'd ever landed, a small family-owned textile business in Queens, whose owner, a man named Howard Park, had given her the account after 3 meetings and told her afterward that he'd made up his mind in the second meeting, but held the third one just to make sure he hadn't made up his mind for the wrong reasons. Howard Park's business had grown by 60% over the 6 years she'd managed their accounts. He still sent her a card at New Year's. Not an email. Card through the mail, handwritten. She thought about what it had cost to build this thing. Not in money, though the money had been real and hard and specific. The years of living narrow, so the business could live wider. In other ways. In the particular price you pay when you spend years being underestimated and chooses, over and over again, to respond to it with excellence rather than noise. That choice was not free. It looked like dignity from the outside. From the inside, it was sometimes closer to an act of sustained endurance, and endurance always costs something, even when it's worth it. She picked up her phone. She turned it face up. She opened her messages. The first one was from Marcus, sent at 7:16 this morning. Elaine Park's story posted at 6:48 a.m. Front page digital. Read it when you're ready. It's thorough. She read it. It took 20 minutes. Elaine had done what Nia had trusted she would do. She had treated the story as a story, not as a cause. She'd presented the documentation with precision. She'd traced the pattern across the 3 targets she'd been able to verify, including 2 who had provided on-record statements. She'd requested comment from the Crowe Foundation at 11 p.m. Friday night and received a brief statement that managed to simultaneously deny everything and confirm the specific shape of the denial in ways that anyone reading carefully would find it instructive. The story was fair. It was accurate. It was damaging in exactly the proportion that the truth warranted, no more. Nia read it twice. Then she put the phone down and sat with it for a moment. She didn't feel triumphant. She'd wondered during the worst nights of the past 2 weeks if she'd feel triumphant when this came. She didn't. What she felt was something closer to settled, not happy, not vindicated in the dramatic sense, but grounded in a way she hadn't felt since the morning the first photograph arrived at her client portal. She felt like herself again. That was the thing the past 2 weeks had taken from her, more than anything else. Not the clients, not the contracts, not the public narrative, those were all recoverable. What had been harder to hold on to was the quiet internal knowledge of her own ground. Place she stood, the thing she knew herself to be, independent of what any room or any woman with a champagne flute decided to say about her. That knowledge had flickered in the worst moments. Not gone out, never fully gone out, but flickered. And recovering it had required the same thing. Recovering anything required, work and time, and choosing the same direction over and over, even when it was exhausting to choose. She got up and washed her coffee cup. She got dressed. She drove to Mrs. Patterson's apartment on 143rd Street because she needed to return the borrowed sewing kit she'd had for 6 months and had been meaning to return every week and kept forgetting, and because sometimes the most useful thing you can do after 2 weeks of crisis is the ordinary errand you've been putting off for too long. Mrs. Patterson answered the door in her housecoat and looked at Nia with the particular expression of someone who had watched the news this morning and had opinions about it. "Come in," she said. Nia came in. Mrs. Patterson made tea without asking if Nia wanted any. She set it on the kitchen table alongside a plate of something she'd baked that morning, dense, sweet, specific to a recipe she'd been making for 40 years, and which had no formal name, and which Nia had eaten twice before and thought about more than that. "I saw the story," Mrs. Patterson said, sitting down. "I know," Nia said, "that woman." She shook her head, not elaborating. She didn't need to elaborate. "Yes," Nia said. "You going to be all right?" Nia looked at her. Mrs. Patterson was 71 years old and had buried a husband and raised 3 children and built a small business tailoring and alterations out of a kitchen on 143rd Street. And the question she'd just asked was not a pleasantry. It was an actual question, asked by someone who had lived long enough to know the difference between surviving something and actually being all right on the other side of it. "Yes," Nia said. And then, because Mrs. Patterson deserved more than one word, "It's going to take a little while. But yes." Mrs. Patterson nodded, like this was the correct answer, and she'd known it would be. "The dress held up," she said. It did. "The shoulder seam? Perfect." Mrs. Patterson made a small, satisfied sound and picked up her tea. They sat in the kitchen on 143rd Street for 45 minutes, drinking tea and eating whatever the baked thing was, and talking about almost nothing that had happened in the past 2 weeks and almost everything else, Mrs. Patterson's youngest daughter, who was having trouble with her landlord, the fabric market in the Bronx that had changed ownership, a documentary they'd both watched and had different opinions about. It was the best 45 minutes Nia had spent in longer than she could immediately calculate. Crowe Foundation's board met on Monday. Nia learned about it through Marcus, who learned about it through one of his contacts in the nonprofit governance world. The meeting lasted 4 hours. By the end of it, 3 board members had submitted resignations effective immediately. A 4th submitted conditional resignation, pending the completion of an internal review that everyone in the room understood was a formality. The foundation's 3 largest corporate sponsors issued statements over the course of Monday and Tuesday. All 3 statements were carefully worded to avoid direct accusation. All 3 announced the suspension of their partnership with the Crowe Foundation, pending review. The language was identical in enough structural ways that it was clear someone had been consulting, though nobody admitted to coordinating. The keynote speakers for the Foundation's upcoming international summit began withdrawing on Tuesday afternoon. The first 2 cited scheduling conflicts. The third cited the statements directly. By Thursday morning, 11 of the summit's 17 featured speakers had withdrawn. On Thursday afternoon, the Foundation issued a statement announcing the postponement of the summit. Vanessa issued a personal statement the same day. It was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph denied wrongdoing. The second paragraph expressed commitment to the Foundation's mission. The third paragraph announced she was taking a personal leave of absence from her role as executive director to focus on her health and family. Nia read it once. She filed it in a folder in her desk drawer with the rest of the documentation and closed the drawer and did not look at it again. The suspended contract came back first. Client, a mid-size manufacturing company whose CFO had called Priya in a controlled panic on the 3rd day of the campaign, sent formal notification of reinstatement on Wednesday morning, a week after the Aurelius Gala. The CFO called personally in the afternoon, which was not something he'd done before. He was professional about it. Precise. He didn't over-apologize because he was not a man given to excess in any direction. We should have waited for verification before putting the account in review, he said. You acted on the information you had, Nia said. The information was falsified. Yes, but you didn't know that yet. A pause. You're being very reasonable about this. I'm being accurate about this, Nia said. There's a difference. He was quiet for a moment. We'd like to expand the scope of the engagement, he said. If you're interested. She told him she was. She set up a meeting. She hung up and sat at her desk and let herself feel that one for a moment, not triumphantly, but fully. Particular satisfaction of watching something you built survive a concerted attempt to destroy it, of standing on the other side of it and finding the thing still standing. 3 new clients came in the month following the gala, not because of the story she would have rejected that causation as firmly as she'd rejected the one Vanessa had tried to build. The new clients came because the story had made people look at her record who hadn't looked before. And the record was what it was. 11 years of documented, sourced, verifiable work that spoke for itself, with the authority of everything that had been built slowly and without shortcuts. The story didn't make her career. It made her career visible to people who hadn't been looking yet. The distinction mattered to her. She kept it. Elaine Park's story ran as a 3-part series. The second part focused on the previous targets. Elaine had identified 2 women, both in financial services, both of whom had experienced reputation damage in the preceding 4 years through campaigns that bore the same structural fingerprints as what had been done to Nia. One of them had rebuilt after 18 months. The other had left the industry entirely. Nia read the second part carefully. She looked up the woman who had left the industry. Her name was Christine Adeyemi. She had left finance and was now running a small nonprofit in Chicago that provided financial literacy education to high school students in underserved districts. The nonprofit's website had a photograph of Christine standing in front of a classroom, and in the photograph she looked like found the place where she was supposed to be, even if the road that led there had gone through somewhere she hadn't chosen. Nia wrote her a letter, not an email, a letter handwritten on good paper. She told Christine who she was. She told her about what had happened. She told her about the pattern Elaine had documented. She didn't offer to do anything specific. She didn't want to impose an agenda on someone whose path had gone somewhere different and who might have complicated feelings about any of this. She just said, "You are not an isolated case, and you are not forgotten, and if there's ever anything that would be useful to you, here is how to reach me." She mailed it on a Tuesday morning on her way to the office. Christine called 3 weeks later. They talked for an hour and a half. Penthouse came later. Nia didn't know it was happening until Roman asked her to meet him there on a Saturday afternoon, citing something I need to show you, which was uncharacteristically vague for him. He was specific about most things, and which she had therefore been mildly skeptical about for the 40 minutes it took her to drive across town. He met her in the lobby of a building she'd never been to, in a neighborhood she associated with a particular tier of Manhattan real estate that she'd read about, mostly in the context of advising clients about asset allocation. They took the elevator to the top floor. He opened the door. She walked in. The space was large and empty and smelled of fresh plaster and paint, with the particular quality of light that comes through floor-to-ceiling windows facing east when the afternoon sun is still working its way down. The floors were bare concrete, pale gray. The walls were white. The bones of what would become a kitchen were visible on the south end countertops not yet installed, fixtures stubbed in, the suggestion of an enormous central island. She walked through the main room slowly. She stopped at the east wall. Full-height windows, floor to ceiling. The city spread out below with the specific generosity of high elevation, enormous, detailed, impossibly itself. She turned. She looked at the space. The bookshelves, the ones she'd described once, in passing, during a dinner conversation 6 months ago, talking about the apartment she'd always imagined, and had never finished the thought because it felt indulgent. They were framed in the walls on the north side. Not installed yet, but framed. The recesses built exactly to the dimension she'd described. Though she described them in the loose language of something you say not because you expect anyone to remember it, but because someone asked what you'd want and you told the truth. The office facing east. She'd mentioned it once. The idea of working with the morning light coming in rather than the afternoon glare she had at her current office. The kitchen island. She remembered saying something about it. An offhand comment, maybe not even directed at Roman specifically, but at the table in general, something about always having wanted to be the person with enough counter space to actually spread things out. He had remembered all of it. She stood in the empty space and felt something happen in her chest that was not a clean or simple feeling. It was layered in the way that things are layered when they mean more than one thing at once. There was something warm in it, and something terrifying in it, and something she didn't have an immediate word for that lived in between those two things. She turned to look at Roman. He was standing near the door, not in the middle of the room, not close to her. He had given her the space to walk through it without him, which was a form of understanding she recognized, and which made the thing in her chest more complicated. "This is yours," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "I don't need you to give me a life," she said. Not sharply. Not defensively, just clearly, because it was important for both of them that the sentence be said. "I know," he said. He looked around the empty room. "I wanted to build something that fits the life you already made." The words arrived without performance, without the cadence of a prepared speech or the careful orchestration of a man trying to say the right thing. He said it some way he said most things that mattered flatly, quietly, as a fact he was offering rather than an argument he was making. Nia looked at him. Then she looked at the windows, at the east-facing light, at the framed recesses where the bookshelves would go. She crossed the room to the kitchen end, where the island's dimensions were marked in tape on the concrete floor. Someone had been very precise about it, and she looked at the size of it. Large enough to spread a financial report across from 3 different angles. She'd said that once, as a joke almost, and someone had taken a tape measure and made it true. She didn't know what to do with that. She'd spent 11 years not needing anyone to make things true for her. She'd learned to do it herself, and she'd learned it well enough that the learning had become identity, not just a skill, but a self-definition. The woman who didn't wait, the woman who built it herself, the woman who didn't owe anything to anyone, because she hadn't taken anything from anyone, And here was a man who wasn't trying to give her something she didn't have. He was trying to build something that matched what she'd already built. That was different. She wasn't completely sure standing there that she knew what to do with different. She moved back toward the window. Near the glass on the floor was a folded white dinner napkin. Beside it, 2 takeout containers from a place she recognized, a Thai spot in the village that neither of them had been to together, but that she'd mentioned once in the context of the best green curry she'd found in the city. He'd remembered that too. She picked up the napkin. She laughed. It came out of her without warning, a real laugh, surprised and full, the kind she didn't produce on cue. She held the napkin and laughed at the specific absurdity of it. The thing that had started everything. The object that had been dropped at her feet as a weapon and had become, in the span of 4 minutes in a hotel lobby, something else entirely. Roman's mouth moved, the 2-second version of his smile. She set the napkin down and moved to the window. The city below was doing what it always did. Cars. People. The organized chaos of several million lives occupying the same improbable island at the same time, each one complete and specific and operating on its own terms regardless of what was happening in anyone else's story. She had spent 11 years in that city. She had walked into rooms where saw a list of looked at her and saw of things they thought she wasn't. She had absorbed those looks and filed them, and continued. She had built a firm, and built a record, and built a reputation that had survived a concerted attempt to unmake it, not because she was invulnerable, not because she hadn't felt the weight of every morning when she woke up, and the documentation wasn't finished, and the clients were uncertain, and the story was still being written by people who didn't know her. She had survived it because she'd chosen to, in the specific, active, daily way that survival requires choosing. Roman moved to stand beside her. He didn't say anything. She didn't either. They stood at the window together and looked in the city, and afternoon light worked its way across the bare concrete floor. And the empty room around them had the particular quality of spaces that are waiting to become something full of possibility in the way that only unfinished things can be, before the choices that complete them are made. She thought about Vanessa Crowe, not with anger. The anger had been necessary, and she had used it, and it had done its job, and she was finished with it now. She thought about Vanessa, something more like the clarity that comes after a long illness, when you are well enough to look back at what the illness was and understand it as a thing that happened rather than a thing that defined you. Vanessa had looked at her and seen someone who could be reduced. That was the fundamental error. Not the campaign was tactics. The error was the premise beneath it, that Nia Holloway was a reputation, and that the reputation could be separated from the person and destroyed, and that once the reputation was gone, the person would be gone with it. But the reputation had not been separate from the person. It had been produced by the person, built by her hands and her work and her choices across 11 years of rooms that didn't expect her to be there. And when someone tried to take it apart, all the things that had built it were still there. The work was still there. The record was still there. The clients who knew her were still there. And Nia herself was still there. You couldn't take away a life that a person had built inside themselves as well as outside. You could damage the outside. You could spend 2 weeks trying. But the inside was where the thing lived. And the inside belonged to its inhabitant, in a way that no campaign, however well-funded and well-executed, could reach. Vanessa had never understood that. She'd never understood it because she had spent 20 years building an identity that lived entirely in the external world, in the foundation and the keynotes and the building with her name on it, and people spoke to her in lobbies. In the way she had built herself outward without building inward, and when the external structure began to come apart, there was nothing beneath it to hold. Nia didn't feel sorry for her, but she understood her, which was a different thing. Turned from the window. Roman looked at her. "I have conditions," she said. He waited. "I'm not moving into something that belongs to you. If I'm here, my name is on the deed alongside yours." "Already planned," he said. "I'm not rearranging my life to fit the requirements of your world. I need to be able to work, travel, meet with clients and journalists, and anyone else my career requires, without having to manage the optics of your name attached to mine. I'd never ask you to stop working. You'd be surprised how many men say that." He held her gaze. "I'm aware of what I'm asking you to be adjacent to. I'm not asking you to be inside it." She studied his face. Are you ever getting out of it? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. The honest kind of quiet. The legitimate side of the business can stand alone. I've been restructuring for 14 months. But the name doesn't go away. The history doesn't go away. I know that. You're asking if I want to. Yes. He looked at the window. What I want, he said, is to have built something real enough that it doesn't need the rest of it to stand. He paused. Don't know if I get there. But that's the direction. She listened to that. She found it more credible than a cleaner answer would have been. One more thing, she said. Go ahead. If we're doing this, she gestured, encompassing the room and the windows and the napkin on the floor and everything those things implied. I walk beside you. He looked at her. Not behind you, she said. Not in front. Beside you. Equal ground, even when the ground gets complicated. Roman Bellandi, who had spent 35 years in a world structured almost entirely around hierarchy, around who stood where and what that meant, and who understood the difference, he looked at this woman in the empty room above Manhattan. This woman who had survived something that had been specifically engineered to destroy her, and who was now standing in his partially built apartment, telling him the terms. And he said, yes. One word complete. Nia nodded. She turned back to the window. Below them, the city moved and breathed and did what it did without interruption or ceremony or any awareness of the two people standing at the top of it looking down. The afternoon was getting later. The light had shifted in the time they'd been standing there, the particular shift of late afternoon in Manhattan, when the angle changes and everything goes briefly gold before it goes dark. She looked at the takeout containers on the floor. Is that actually green curry? She asked. From the place on Bleecker. You called them? I called them. She looked at the bare concrete floor and the napkin and the takeout containers and the framed recesses for the bookshelves and the tape marks for the kitchen island, and she thought about Mrs. Patterson's kitchen on 133rd Street and Margaret Oksissy's retroactive statement and Christine Adeyemi in front of a classroom in Chicago and Elaine Park's 3-part series and 22 people in a conference room who had shown up on a Friday night to hear the truth from the person it concerned. She thought about Howard Park's handwritten New Year's cards. She thought about her own name, the one that had appeared on the fabricated documents and the edited photographs and the fake former associate clip, the name that had been used as a weapon against her and had survived the use of it intact. But her name. Nobody had given it to her. Nobody had bought it. Nobody had taken it. She picked up one of the takeout containers. She sat down on the floor with her back against the east-facing window, legs stretched out on the bare concrete, the city behind her through the glass. Roman looked at her. There aren't any chairs yet, she said. I know, so. Sit down. He sat down beside her on the concrete floor. He took the second takeout container. They opened them, and the smell of green curry and jasmine rice filled the empty room, and outside the window the city went gold and then began to darken, and neither of them said anything for a while. They sat on the floor of an unfinished room and ate Thai food from containers and watched the light change over a city that had tried for 2 weeks to write Nia Holloway out of its story and had failed because she had already written herself into it in permanent ink, in the kind of permanent that no campaign and no rumor and no woman with a champagne flute and a white dinner napkin could alter. The dinner napkin lay folded on the concrete between them. Nobody picked it up. It didn't need to be picked up anymore. It had already done everything it was going to do.